Okay, so welcome everybody. We are, the last registrants joined this conversation. I would like to say a very big thank you to LLLP for their big efforts in the organization and promotion of this event and others events of the LLL Week, and for the quality of their everyday work that we appreciate very much as association working in education. So thank you very much. Welcome to all. I introduce myself. I'm Maria Giulia Palocci, and I'm the Communication Director at EUCA, the European University College Association. EUCA brings together and represents university colleges and network of colleges in Europe. We are now in 13 countries, and with the aim to exchange experiences and best practices, facilitating the students with new international opportunities, enriching their academic and professional development through non-formal and informal activities in the fields of employability, soft skills, international mobility, and responsible citizenship. Thanks to its membership in global leading Professional Association of Students Affairs and Services, EUCA also offers services to colleges directors and professionals. Thus, they are facilitated in the delivering of the desired learning outcomes for students through supporting internationalization, best practices sharing, and professional development. Our reflection, the input on today's event, starts exactly from the privileged colleges observation point that involves both students and professionals as tutors and training staff. Someone said that we experience 10 years of change in 10 weeks and a lot of trends that were already out there just sped up and are accelerating, and online education is surely one of these. We've been obliged in using it and performing new tools. Many of us already were researching on these issues before the pandemic, and our panelists will talk about it in a few moments. We can say that we are still monitoring the challenges and understanding the effects of the online education. So if they are positive or negative, the consequences of such innovation. There are questions that remain open, especially in relation to the student success and to the ability of the teacher in using such tools. But we want to we are wondering also, what is the role of the EU in these issues? So the European Commission, as you may know, has updated the digital education plan at the end of September, and it outlines the Commission's vision for an high quality, inclusive and accessible digital education in Europe. And it's actually a call to action for stronger cooperation at European level for all the actors involved. The idea is to learn from the COVID crisis to transform Europe's educational systems to make them fit for the digital age. And this is very ambitious. We should invest in EU funds in connectivity, network infrastructure, suitable equipment in schools and university, but also we should receive funds to develop new teaching models, promoting digital skills at all levels from school to university, with new curricula also for teachers, because probably this is one of the secrets of the student success. So starting from this, I would like to start this conversation with Dr. Eva Sandon. Eva is the Vice President of EUSAN, the European University Continuing Education Network, and is Professor for University Continuing Education and Teaching and Learning at the Fernuniversität in Hagen, Germany. She's involved in research on lifelong learning in higher education, with special focus on teaching and learning in the German-speaking and European context since more than 10 years. So thank you for being here, Eva, and In relation to these last issues on the digital education plan, I would like to ask you from your perspective as professor, but in particular from a European network that engaged in university lifelong learning, what are the most important guidelines in this plan? How important is the digital competencies of educator as a prerequisite for digital innovation and student success, according to your studies and your experience also during the last year?
Thank you very much, Maria Giulia, for the very nice introduction and for the invitation to this panel. I would, in a first step, I have a few slides with me for a short introduction, which I would share with you too, though I could speak without, but I think it's sometimes better to see also better what I'm talking about. So I try that in a moment. And oops. Maybe that was one too much. No, it's so. Okay. I just start to start it from here. I don't know. Here is it. It is. Sorry. Here. Yes, now it works. Sorry, always the same. So well, yeah, thank you very much also for pointing out actually the issues with the this digital action plan, because I think the plan highlights some topics that, as you already mentioned, have been already around, but they were sort of accelerated also through the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think one of the central issues that was already there before, and I think which, well, my focus would be on, is really the role of the teachers or the educators and the digital competence of educators. Because I think we are talking also about different generations of educators. We are talking about, as you mentioned, within especially the university colleges, of teachers who are maybe within the university or the college, but also professionals outside. And actually, the issue is how can we bring them to bring success also to the students, you know, so to within the studies with their digital competence. So I'm hoping that this works now. If I go to the next slide. Okay. Wait, I try to, yes, oops, yeah, here it is. Thanks. I'm referring actually to a framework that has been around before the COVID-19 pandemic, but I think this is something very special that gives, from my point of view, a very good insight what actually teachers need to know when we talk about digital competences, also for the students. And I think there are, they have been developed in a European-wide process with people from various sectors. And you can see that it's on the one hand about the professional competences of educators, which means very much about how they professionally engage. It's about their pedagogic competences and their digital competences with regard to digital surroundings, from teaching and learning, the way how they empower learning, how they assess, and which resources actually they use. I think this will be a topic for today. And also how they facilitate learners' digital competence, so lead them to success actually on this level. When we look close on that, and I think here we come to very important topics that are like under these areas, they call it 22 competences. And I think all of us who are teaching in different contexts know how hard it is to know about all of that and to possess all of these competences. But I think it gives us a good view on, and actually a common framework that helps us to think about what is necessary. And I just want to point out a few topics that I think with a European view are very important. One about is, and I think when we talk about professional engagements, is the issue of reflective practice of teachers themselves, you know, so how they actually engage with their own practice. With regard on digital resources, it's very much about this part about protecting, how can we find actually the right resources, how can we also select the ones that are, well, good working, and also thinking of all these regulations we have. The topic of teaching and learning in the sense of collaborative learning, how can we actually facilitate that? Which are the forms that we use in the digital context? And I think most important is an issue that I see in the European context quite on a quite high level, is the issue of accessibility and inclusion. And actually, this is also something that came out from researches I've done in the European context and also beyond. Accessibility is a big thing. And if we talk about COVID-19 and people working from at home, students studying from at home, teachers teaching from at home, there are a lot of things we saw, I think, a lot of bedrooms, kitchens, and many things, you know, where people were working from or learning from. And I think a lot of that has to do with also how can we have accessibility in regards of structures, of course, but also how can we include people who are not so familiar with all these digital things. This is just to give you a frame, and I think we have quite a lot on that. What I did, or what we did in a group of actually open universities, so Jyväskylä, a colleague from here is here also on the panel, is we developed actually a course within Erasmus Plus on digitally competent educators, and had a look a bit on so you see that we reframed a bit the topics. But I think one of the most important issues here was that we tried to work together from different countries with different backgrounds. So it was Turkey, it was Portugal, it was Finland, and it was Germany, with a common frame, but also with a common understanding of teaching. And I think this is something that is a second point when it comes back to what does digital teaching or teaching in the digital context actually mean. And I think on this, I would just also maybe close it here. What we found out when we developed together this program is that it's when we look at this framework and also on digital competences that teachers need, there is actually a specific mindset of teaching behind that. And this has a lot to do, and I hope that the colleagues maybe can say something then on tools or what that means in special, but it's a lot about student-centeredness and personalization of learning. It was a lot about collaborative learning and peer learning. Also, and I think this is something important because the teachers were here or are here, the learners, also for them, and I think we can transform that also for our students then, a structured and developmental process of online learnings. Like there is this 5-stage model of Chili Salmon, but there will be also others of that, and teachers in a role as facilitators of learning. I mean, coming from pedagogy, and I think this idea of teachers as facilitators of learning is not new. But I think when we talk about digital competences for teachers, it becomes a new, how would you say, and it is newly underlined, and I think it has a very it's very important when you talk about that and when we think about teachers in new roles. And I think, to finalize with that the pandemic has helped us to get that clearer when we talk about teaching in a digital surrounding. So thank you very much. I hope I was not too long. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is the the issue of 2020. Unmute yourself. Okay, so thank you very much, Eva, for these inputs. Very, very interesting. As I said before, there is a research that is going on, and it started before the pandemic and has been accelerated during the last year, but also had the opportunity of a deeper understanding of some dynamics, and this is the case of the EU project Adaptive. And as you said, this is a project with a student-centered approach that studied a student-centered approach through real-life tests. We wanted to measure the impacts of new approaches of the through tests. We could see some results, and I'm pleased to introduce now Dr. Sasha Gomez from Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, leader of Adaptive, the Erasmus Plus transnational project that aims at improving and implementing innovative learning ecosystems for students and teachers to increase the quality of education and training in Europe. Sasha Gomez, please.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to share my presentation. So what is going to happen is probably you are going to see the notes first. So please you tell me if you see the presentation or you see something different. For now, you see the presentation, you see the PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
And now something is going to happen. What is what you see? The notes or only the presentation?
The presentation.
So you see the whole screen here.
Yes.
Okay, it is the first time it happens in this way. so I did something good for once. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this, which is one of the main topics in our project, adaptive test as a tool for evaluating the learning process at distance. So let me change this. I like it much more. So now you see the pointer. Okay, so to explain what I mean here and what we try to solve, I have made this thing that I have called face-to-face. There's a mistake here, versus distant learning axis. So in this size of this axis, we have this kind of learning, which is a master and an apprentice. So they work together, these pretty famous guys here, and also from many years ago. So you have an apprentice, you have a master. They are in face-to-face all the time, so they work together, they learn together, and the masters pretty much know everything about the students, because they are friends, they are whatever. If they are not, they will be. So, and then we go further in this axis. So we have traditional model of learning here, for example, where a teacher, a professor, is giving a talk, giving a speech here in front of the students, and the students are learning in this way. So we have it here at the university, we have it in schools. Then we can go further in this axis, and then we have this blended learning, or flipped classrooms, different models, where we combine learning in the classroom with learning at home here. And then at the very end of this axis, we have just the opposite of this master apprentice, which is only face-to-face learning, which is distant learning. Here, this is me, by the way, and those are my students. So this is what happened in the COVID-19 confinement in Spain. So we had to go home, and we were teaching from home, and the students were doing everything at home. So this distant learning, well, we don't have contact with students. We can talk to them. We can send them some emails, different kind of, we can try to have some interaction, but for sure it is very different. It is far, far from this kind of learning. And also it is far from this one, actually. So this thing has some advantages and some disadvantages. So here, for example, in this side, teachers spend a lot of time in the learning process. They have few students, maybe only one. So they spend all the time teaching this one apprentice, 2, 3. On the other side, most of learning activities can be done without the teachers. We can, for example, there are MOOCs, these massive online courses, where teachers put some material on the web, and actually students could do many, many things without interaction with the teachers. If we do that, if we send that to the extreme, I would say, we have many students, thousands of students, because you put some material on the web and the students use it. This is one of the advantages of this site. A disadvantage is that teachers do not see students, so it is hard to know if students are learning or not, if they are learning well, which is something that it is very easy in this site. So teachers know very well how students are performing because they are watching the students or the apprentices, as I said before, almost every day. So we have to solve this problem. So we have a system, a new method of learning, which is in the distance. And there, we cannot see students all the time. So how can we know if they are learning or not? So for doing that, for trying to solve this problem in our project, we are doing some different adaptive tests, adaptive models. And I'm going to introduce here first one platform that we have. I'm going to do it pretty fast. So we have a platform like this where, well, this is the interface, a different screenshot of the interface. So teachers can go inside, they can add questions, tests, different subjects, a lot of learning material here. And well, they introduce questions. This is in Spanish, but you can imagine a test, a multiple answer test, for example. So they develop it here. And as I said, you have the test, the different answers. And we have something called here the difficulty, which is what I'm going to introduce now with this adaptive model. So these questionnaires that we use in our platform, the questions that are going to be asked to the students are included in different levels. So we have questions from the first level. And in this model, a question from the first level is going to be asked first. If a student fails, give a wrong answer, then our model goes to this way. And another question from this first easy level is asked. If they fail again, and sooner or later, well, they have a 0 if they follow this way. Imagine that they are answering well, so they go this way, and sooner or later, the system is going to change and is going to ask questions from a second or even a third level or fourth. We can do tests with 4, 5, an infinite number of levels. And then, well, this means that if a student is answering well these kind of things, more difficult questions are asked, and maybe they can have problems here or not. The point is, this is something that it is transparent for students. So here is the interface for students. Students are answering questions. Sorry, here they can put the answer. They don't know if they are in the first, second, third level, but the system is changing. The questionnaire is changing depending on how they perform. So what does it mean for us and why this is good? Well, here I'm showing you the score of students 2 years ago. This is 2 years ago in a subject that I'm teaching, which is called applied computing. And every dot here is one attempt of a student using the platform. So we can see answers here. And here you don't see it yet, but for example, here in 2.5, you can see that there are many dots. And this means that the system is asking more difficult questions over this point. So at a point, they are stuck here. The students that didn't learn enough to answer more difficult questions are stuck here. At 5, the system is changing again. Over this point, questions are more difficult. So we can see here that some students are stuck again. And in 7.5, we have the same thing. So using this system, we know if in March, April, May, how they are learning. If they are at this level, if they know more, if they know much more or not. And we can introduce more content. For example, if we expected a better result here, then we know what is the problem. The problem is at this point or at this point, and we can improve our lessons here or give more examples or whatever. Here we have something else which is interesting too. What we saw before COVID confinement is that the students actually use the platform much more at the very end, which is something that, well, everybody knows. Students only work on the last days. This is the last 5 days of the semester, and see how big this is. So it is almost the same as 2 months before. So this is another thing that we can see. So if they have a delay or something, we can say, hey, what are you doing, or whatever. We can see that here too, but this is probably, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but this is what happens. They use the platform at the very end. At the very end of here, we have an exam. So they are using the platform only at the very end here. This is something related maybe with something that Tula is going to say after me. Here we rewarded the students because we saw that. And we made the students use the platform before, and results were much better. Anyway, what happens in confinement, comparing with the years before? We can do the same thing. So we have here our results with this adaptive platform in this year, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and this last year actually. And this yellow part of the graphs are the time that the students were in confinement in Spain, which is from March 11 to 30. Well, they were confined more. This is only 1 month, but our results from this study went in this, only in this 20 days. So we saw a couple of things if we want to compare confinement with the previous years without it. So students were stuck here, most of them in this level, the level that changes. I don't want to go into the details of the subject, okay? But after 5, if they want to have scores better than 5, they have to learn much more. So in this period, still, they were pretty much stuck here. It also happens the next year here. And in confinement, and this is bigger, but it is the same period of time. It is bigger because they use the platform much more. So we had better results. Most of the students in the same period, their learning was in this area. So they went over this 5 and they were stuck before. Well, I would say 50% of them, but here there are only a few. And actually some of them were in this big area here, which is the most advanced contents. This happened in the same period, and what we have learned in this confinement is that a student, at least in our experience, worked at home much more than previous years, and they were very interested in improving their knowledge. We think that they were actually scared of losing the year, so they made a big effort. But anyway, this is the result that we had. But the point here is that we can control it. So we can see how much they learn and when, and actually what they have learned or not. And we could do different things here, we improved, we did more lessons. And because I don't want to do this so long, I go to the conclusions directly. So my conclusions are that with adaptive tests, we can detect learning problems in real time. And these adaptive tests give us valuable information about the contents that require a higher effort for the students, and then we can correct it in real time. We see it, the systems give us a warning or something. And well, in general, we have developed a system that acts as a master, if you remember this axis, who is watching these apprentices all the time. And that's it, that's the message I wanted to share with you today, Maria. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Actually, there I see some links because all this research was also on the national Spanish media. Many people asked Sasha about the results of the students during the confinement. So we are pleased to know that you are really very important in this. It was probably for someone a bit technical, but it helps us in understanding how much it is useful to go ahead also with this research for student success, but also in reducing the students' dropout rate in the community. So thank you very much. And I introduce you Tula, Dr. Tula Nousiainen, that works at the Department of Teacher Education of University of Jyväskylä, as said before, in Finland, and contributed to the adapted research. Tula, my question is, what are the lessons we learned from the research done so far on student motivation in the use of online learning platforms, and how it is related to teachers' digital competencies and the use of gamification? Please.
Thank you. Just a second, I will share my screen. I hope you can all see the presentation mode now.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, when I was preparing this presentation, I was first thinking about just talking about the gamification point of view, because that's been our focus area in the adaptive project. But in the end, I decided that I will combine it with some more general lessons learned or some general observations about the things that we have discovered and found and observed during this quite exceptional year. And I'm glad I did, because there are some nice touching points with what, for example, with Eva was presenting earlier. So I think there are some connections with what was already discussed earlier. So I will start with one of the more general observations about the challenges related to online learning. And especially now in this distance learning situation, there have been different challenges, first at the beginning of the situation, and now when we have been in this situation for some time. And so I will present some points about what kinds of challenges there have been and how they have now changed during the time that we have been in this situation. And of course, in the spring, both educators and students had to leap very suddenly into the situation where almost 100% of all education was taking place online. And this was, of course, a challenge for both of them. So educators had to rethink their digital pedagogical competencies. They had to try to put them into use in a more meaningful way than they probably had even had time to plan or think about. And at the same time, the students had to work in an increasingly self-directed manner and to adopt an increasingly self-directed approach to learning. And of course, when these things happen and this change happens so suddenly, it's quite a stressful situation. But at the same time, it also is quite a huge learning opportunity, because when something happens so suddenly and disrupts the way we have been doing things and disrupts the established teaching practices, then it forces us to re-examine the way we have been teaching or the ways we have been learning. And in the spring, I think the main focus was mainly on just to get things done and get by, and we were in a sort of a survival mode. And many educators, the advice they were getting was just to try to keep things as simple as possible and don't put yourself into difficult positions. And if you have had some ambitious ideas on how to realize online teaching, so maybe this is not the time to do it, but just to keep things as simple as possible. But now, when we have been in this situation for quite some time, the challenges have changed a little bit. And especially now, after this prolonged distance learning circumstances, students are starting to experience some sort of a distance learning fatigue. And especially if all learning online is taking place in similar environments and using the exact same tools and exact same methods, then it's easy to lose motivation when doing everything in the same way. So now the challenge for the educators is not so much about the basic pedagogical competencies or digital competencies as it was in the spring, but more about challenging themselves further and to expand the methods they are using and in a pedagogically meaningful way, and to make their sort of a digital pedagogical toolkit a bit more versatile so that it responds to the growing expectations of the students as well. So even though everybody is now more used to organizing online learning and studying online, there is now a need for more advanced digital and pedagogical competencies in order to make the learning experience a quality learning experience for the students. And now I will jump into this one case example from the adaptive project, which is about gamification. And I think the lesson learned here is that the gamified elements that are implemented on learning platforms, they can make learning more motivating for students. But at the same time, we need to pay attention to doing this in such a way that we respond to these different motivational orientations of different students. And I will explain a bit what I mean by this. In previous research, there's been some evidence that game elements and gamification can, in fact, support motivation. And also, such are referred to the fact that students often complete tasks at the very end of the course. So it also has potential to motivate students to focus more on tasks and to complete the tasks in a timely manner. So we can see that there is clearly some potential with using gamification in the online learning context. And also in the adaptive project, we got a positive experience. What we did was that we conducted a pilot with teacher students. We implemented some very basic and very simple game elements into a Moodle course for first-year teacher students. There was a backstory about a school of digital wizards because this was an ICT-related course. And they had a wizard avatar that visualized their progress to them. So when the avatar was complete, it meant that they had finished the course and passed the course. And also they had a possibility to obtain some extra badges for doing some extra tasks on the course. And the experience was that the students reported that the gamification and the game elements had at least slightly positive effect on their motivation. And also their overall attitude towards studying on online platform was somewhat more positive at the end of the course than it had been at the beginning of the course. So clearly the experience was positive. But what we still need to do and to think about is how to cater for these different motivational orientations, because we also did a user type survey for our teacher students, and we found that maybe not so surprisingly, in teacher students, the social interaction elements and the collaborative elements were things that really motivated them in their studies. So these were the motivational orientations that were most prominent in the teacher student group. And as we probably might all agree that these traditional learning platforms like Moodle or other similar platforms are not probably platforms where social interaction or collaboration or a creative collaboration is not their strongest point. So we need to think about how to maybe address the needs and the motivational orientations of, for example, our teacher students in a better way. And one next step is that we're going to experiment with a pilot where we are trying to use virtual reality as a sort of an environment for pedagogical activities. And at least we can say that on paper, it seems like a good idea because virtual reality has lots of affordances for collaboration and social interaction, exploration, creativity and immersion. And it seems that these would be quite a good match with the motivational orientations of our teacher students. But it will be interesting to see whether it is the case also in reality and not only in theory as it seems on paper. But now I'll jump back to the more general perspective and to the final point, which means that I think it's fairly safe to say that based on everything that we have learned now during this year, it's become even more evident that supporting the digital and pedagogical competencies of teaching staff is a top priority, both on an individual level and on institutional level, but also nationally and transnationally, like we saw in the first presentation. And also, at the same time, it's of course a key factor in providing high quality online learning experiences to students. And this of course requires identifying some competence gaps in digital competencies. And for an individual teacher or individual educator, it might mean that they use a self-assessment tool, for example, and identify some gaps in their competencies and then take some actions based on what they discover. Or it might mean developing some professional development models. Like, for example, we are now participating in a recently kicked off Erasmus Plus project called No Teacher Educator Left Behind, where we are developing a professional development model for teacher educators' digital competencies. And as we already heard in the first presentation, universities are putting now plenty of focus on continuing education, and the course for digital competent educators is one example of such courses. And it really appears to me, and my understanding is that digital competencies are one very important content area when we are talking about continuing education and the focus areas that they are really emphasizing at the moment. And I think I will conclude on a bit more informal note, and that maybe the past year has definitely highlighted the importance of sharing good practices with colleagues, either within an institution or more broadly, for example, in some online communities, sharing practices, sharing pedagogical ideas, sharing good examples of using digital tools. And not only the importance of sharing good practices, but also I think that it's increased people's willingness to do that because they've seen the value of sharing practices with others. And maybe I can finish with a note that I think if I have to mention one kind of positive thing to come out of this past year and not the exceptional situation, I think this would be one of them, that the sharing culture has probably taken quite huge steps forward now during this year, when we have all realized the value of sharing not only knowledge, but also this very practice-oriented ideas and tips to each other. But I think my time is up now, so thank you for my part.
Thank you very much, Tuula. Well, social interaction is saved because I understand that even if we are online and we push for that, social interaction is still very important. But what people are asking in the questions is related to the teacher's motivation. They say, Cristina Reyes-Barro says, we talk about the students' motivation, but what about the teacher's motivation? Are they ready for this kind of teaching? And others, as Arya said, it's very important, it's a very good aspect, and we have to concentrate on that.
Yes, it is indeed a very good question. And I think at least we have done some surveys in our university now during this year, and I don't think they have been published yet, but there have been some indications that after the first shock that everybody had to adapt into this so quickly, they have started to see this as a motivation also for themselves, to challenge them to think about new ways. And of course, it's also a kind of a two-directional route, that if the students are motivated, then it also motivates the teacher and vice versa. So I think the both aspects are important.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. We have a question for Sasha about your model. This seems to be a good strategy for STEAM classes. Do you think, Sasha, if that it will work also for social sciences or humanities subjects?
Yeah, well, we have used it in humanities, for example, in art. In art classes. The thing is, if we create a questionnaire, something that it is automatically done by a computer, in something like modern art, which was the subject that we were using, they have more contents that cannot be included in a questionnaire, for example. So what happens there is that our questionnaires help for knowing what happens with the student, where they are failing or where they having mistakes and these kind of things. Of course, it is not enough for a full assessment of the students. So teachers should do more, but it helps. It helps in knowing how the learning process is going, for example. Well, I have talked only a few minutes, but we have actually more adaptive models that could be adapted better for this kind of subjects. So yeah, it helps, but it is true that there are some contents that cannot be fully evaluated by a computer, I would say.
Okay, thank you. If we have other questions, you can also, yeah.
May I just, sorry, to jump in, because Tula was already pointing at that, and that was the question about the motivation. And I think, well, I'm do a lot of things in university continuing education, so a lot of with professionals who come back, and they are highly motivated especially with regard to digital competences, because they want to get over that Tula, what you already described, you know, this first step where they needed to do something. And I think the issue is more, how do you elaborate on the program, or how do you structure the curriculum that students could really have meaningful learning experience, so that they could use actually what we do, or I think what is common when you do continuing education, that students bring their own professional practice in and work on their own, how they would do then their teaching, or bring their own course they want to do differently. And I think this brings the meaningfulness. And I think we do not have the problem when it comes to people who return for that. The question is maybe more for students who do who are initially studying, you know, and who would maybe not really understand. But I know maybe Tula, you see that differently. But for people who are already professionals and teaching in various settings, they come and say, I have a problem, and if you have a program for me where I can work with that, that's great. So I think I just wanted to add that, because I think this is a different perspective then. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that in the Digital Education Action Plan, there is a very special part dedicated to this development of new modernized curricula and digital upskilling to include the basics of programming for teachers, training and guidance. And so this is crucial to ensure that educational systems meet the needs of also the society, but also labor markets, and address the digital skills where the lack of technology also is. It could be the case of the teachers maybe at the beginning of this trip, big long trip. Okay, thank you. Other questions? No. No one? Okay. So I would like to give the floor now for the conclusions to Martina Darmanin from the steering committee of Lifelong Learning Platform. I don't know if she's, yeah, I see her. Please, Martina, unmute yourself. Okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I was having troubles, connectivity issues in this regard. No, I believe, first of all, thank you to all the speakers for presenting your input on the projects that you have carried out. It was very interesting to follow the discussion, a bit technical from my point. I've been very involved in the social dimension cluster within the European Students' Union, and that talks about the accessibility of higher education. And I believe your approach in this has really highlighted how important it is to focus not only on the students, but also on how the teachers are engaging with this shift in digital learning. And we've seen from Sasha's presentation how digital learning can provide a means of understanding how students access learning, and it provides a very, very beneficial input for us to plan the next steps ahead and to be able to prevent the fatigue that Tula was highlighting is a challenge, and gamification of learning is an interesting approach to it. And I've also liked the inputs that Eva has brought into this from her experience in Germany as well. So there's a lot to take in, and a lot where we can improve. So thank you very much for all this input. And it's something that is going to help us in the next steps forward, especially in our advocacy strategies at European level on the Digital Education Action Plan. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Martina, and I invite all of you to go to the website of Adaptive, where you can find also the results, the output. We're almost finishing this big project, so I think it's also interesting to find out the results of this big and very good research. I think it's time to close. So I thank you very much, all of you, especially the panelists, Eva, Tula, and Sasha. And I hope you enjoyed. I think I enjoyed very much. And I think it was a very high level debate. And we hope maybe next year to talk about the second year of learning after COVID. I think that we'll have many things to say and discuss. So thanks again and see you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.